Hi, welcome to Adoption Now, your adoption show. I'm April Fallon. Enjoy this episode. Welcome to Adoption Now, your adoption show. I'm your host, April Fallon. Hey, we are starting a new group called Adoption Now Warriors, and we'd love for you to join us on Wednesday night for prayer. We recognize we cannot do Adoption Now alone, and we need a team of people praying. So if you want to be a part of that group, just go to Adoption Now on Facebook and join that group. And if you want to donate on Adoption Now, we are a nonprofit, and you can donate through Facebook as well by clicking on the donate button. And you can now subscribe to our podcast right there too. Thank you to all of you who have been supporting us so that we could get this podcast up and running and continue to record these amazing stories. We are on all platforms. This is super exciting for us. We're on Apple Podcasts, Amazon, iHeart, Spotify, Stitcher, Google, and now we're on Audible. It's so fun to tell everybody that wherever they look, whatever platform they listen to podcasts on, you can definitely find us. So if your friends and family are like, I don't have Apple, it's okay. They can find a way to hear your story. All right, our guest today joins us from the Midwest, and this interview is a long time in coming. Tiffany is a writer and adoptive mother. Tiffany, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks.
This is a long time that we've waited to do this.
Right, yeah, it's been a long time.
I think we connected back in season 1.
We did, several years ago.
So you put your story in right before we took a break. So we've had a couple years pass, and here you are. God has the best timing.
Well, I'm so excited to be here finally, and so much has actually changed in our life too. So
yeah, and I think that's really cool because a lot of times people have put their stories in and come on the show and said, in that 2 years, we actually adopted again, or we started a publishing company, or we wrote another book. So it's kind of exciting to see how much has changed. But let's start at the very beginning of your story.
Sure. So we got married when we were 20, and we decided to wait 5 years to have a family. God surprised us, though, and we actually ended up getting pregnant it was a surprise, and we lost that baby at 16 weeks along. The thing about it, though, was we had not been entirely sure that we could have children biologically. So adoption was always our plan. We were pleasantly surprised, obviously, but also heartbroken that we lost the baby. But in the back of our minds, we had planned on adopting, so it wasn't really like as devastating, I guess, as it would be to some, if that makes sense. But we ended up having another biological child a year after we lost that baby, and he was just a blessing. I mean, he was just an answer to prayer, to be honest with you. And then we had another child 2 years later, Ava. After that, we had a couple more miscarriages, actually, and we were like, kind of at that point, do we adopt? Is this the timing? Because we were still planning on adopting, even with biological children. That was just always on our heart. When I was 7 is when I first learned about adoption, and I was like, let's do it. I was 7, and I was like making a plan on how we could adopt someday, and I was trying to convince my parents to adopt, and all of this. And Jeff actually felt the call to adopt in middle school as well, before we were together, of course. And so it just always was like a desire, I think, that God placed in our hearts just at a really young age. We had Teo and Ava, and then we had 2 miscarriages, and we were prayerfully considering what to do next. We ended up getting pregnant again and had a healthy pregnancy and a healthy birth. And Liam was born in 2011. And then shortly after that, Teo got really sick, our oldest son. He was 5 at the time. And we found ourselves in a place that we just didn't ever expect to be in. He was just so ill in the hospital We were in the pediatric ICU, a couple hours away from home.
What were his symptoms?
Right. So what took us in the very beginning was he had he was always a sickly child. He just got sick a lot. If there was something going around, he caught it. If we went to the library, he got sick. Like, he had all the side effects to all the medications. Like, he really had a rough go of it. When he was 2, when Ava was born, he actually started vomiting a lot, and he just couldn't keep things down. So we looked into different, specialists and all the different things that you could think of, food allergies and digestive issues, anything. We did all of that, and we just kept coming up with nothing. They kept telling us that he was fine and he's growing and maybe he just can't eat that right now, or maybe he's teething, or, all of these things. And, in my heart, I knew that wasn't what it was. There was something wrong. So fast forward to he's 5 years old, and we thought we kind of had a handle on things, made some dietary changes, just kind of upped some probiotics and things like that. And the doctors still were kind of like, he's growing. Hopefully it's just a season. It's a phase. He'll grow out of it. He ended up with bronchitis, and we took him in, and he wasn't able to to keep his medication down. So they ended up doing a shot of medication, antibiotics for him. But whatever his reaction was, whatever spurred his reaction, I don't know if it was, we can't sit here and point fingers at it for sure was that medication, or it was, whatever, it triggered in him an immune response that actually kind of turned on all of his immune system, and it went into kind of overdrive, and it just started shutting down his organs. So that was on a Monday that he had that shot, and by Thursday we were in the ER, being transferred to the Children's Hospital 2 hours away. His kidneys were failing, and that went on for 5.5 weeks.
What were they telling you in that 5.5 weeks?
Well, at first we really thought we had answers. That first day we kind of thought it was just kind of to put it kind of lightly, but a fluke, like this, whatever virus he had kind of caused his kidneys to not function, and that they just needed time to heal, which we found after about 3 days was not the case, because he wasn't healing and he was getting worse. The dialysis wasn't helping. It was starting to go into other organs. His fevers were still there, just things like that. So there was this oh my goodness, just such a kind doctor there who had seen a case like this before. And she was actually 9 months pregnant. She was so sweet. And she just came in just as this mom, right? And she just came in and was just like, we need to test for this. And no one had thought of that. And so it's really cool looking back to see how God kind of places people in your life.
Mm-hmm.
But he ended up having something called HLH, which just, it's exactly what that is just, it kind of turns on all of you have an immune response to something simple. So it could be a cold or some virus, and it just kind of triggers your immune system, and it just revs up and starts fighting itself. And so they did the best they could at that hospital, but they were trying to get us transferred to another hospital that was more specialized in that. Teo just he wasn't healthy enough for that. There was a very short window of time that we were very hopeful that he was on the way to being healthy enough for a bone marrow transplant and all of these things at this other hospital. The window didn't last long, and we ended up losing him after 5.5 weeks. But in that 5.5 weeks, I mean, we just saw such peace and felt God's just hand on us and hand on Teo in a way that is just really unexplainable. While we were there, we met other kids and saw other babies that were there alone, and I mean, just alone. And it was really difficult to watch that as we're sitting there surrounded by people helping us care for our other kids so that we could be there with Teo he was never alone. One of us was there all the time. And I don't know, it was just kind of like it stirred up that passion for adoption again in both Jeff and I through that. I mean, I know we were grieving and hurting but we were watching this like our lives are too short. It's just, it's fleeting, you know, and watching Teo and his short life and how he was loved by a family. And we would have, and so many people, anyone would have given anything for him. And I think every child deserves that. And Jeff and I walked away from the hospital just like ready for that, I guess, like ready to fight.
Yeah. Fight for another child. Every time I hear the story, I cry. I mean, when I read the story, when we pre-interviewed right now, it's just so devastating to hear that you had to be in a hospital room on the last moments with your child. But you said that something amazing happened in those last moments.
Yeah. Just the holiness of being with him, holding him. Jeff is a worship leader, and Teo had favorite songs, and Jeff just sang over him, and I just held him. And there really is something holy about that moment where they meet their creator, but he took his last breath, and I just felt holy. I don't know how to explain it, but it's like when it reminded me of when he was born and they handed him to me and he looked at me and he wasn't crying. It wasn't a scary thing, but he wasn't crying, but it was just like he looked deep into my soul, you know, he's just like this. He was always this old soul, and just some of the things that he said while he was in the hospital, even, it was just like he understood more than we understood him to understand, you know, and holding him as he took that last breath and just surrendering everything to the Lord. We're just so small in all of this, you know.
Did you and Jeff go through a time of being angry?
Such a hard question for me. I don't feel like I can answer it for him. We've had our moments, right? Like anyone going through hard things. I think, yes, I've been angry. I can't say that I have always directed my anger, like it hasn't always been directed at God. And I don't think I have sat in the anger towards God, but I have been angry, and maybe my asking why stems from being angry, but I have kind of gone through last 18 months of just kind of like, why do all of these things happen? Like, why Teo? And, you know, why are all these other kids without families surviving? You know, they don't have any medical care, and how are they surviving? And then, like, my son had everything, like doctors that would have done anything for him.
And praying,
and
people
praying,
and why didn't God
all over the
answer
world
in that way? I think that
Mm-hmm.
that's really hard for a lot of people is
Yeah.
when you go through such deep tragedy and you wonder why God chose to do it that way. And that's where I think you're right when you say we're just so small because
Mm.
we don't understand the bigger picture and he's there with us in the grief. I just thank you for applying to be on the show, but also for coming and just being so vulnerable. And in the show, I always feel so honored when people come on and really share deeply from their heart. And it's heartache. There are a lot of times of just complete heartache, and people are so vulnerable, like you've just been. And through that, we see that God is in the midst, even when he doesn't answer the way we want him to.
It's so true. And he didn't answer the way we wanted him to, but he did answer, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he did. And Teo isn't suffering. And I think there are just so many things in this world that aren't going to make sense to us until we get to heaven, you know?
Yeah. And that's where faith comes in, right? Where you believe. I mean, I've been through some things before and thought, I just don't want to believe anymore. I just can't believe anymore. And I realized that it was more painful to not believe. I felt more alone in not believing and choosing to reject faith than I did going through the grief with God and not having the answers. We don't always get the answers. And it doesn't make sense. And I'm sure the people around you just felt deflated. And I mean, what a time of grief. But let's talk about as you moved forward, what came out of that grief.
Right. So, well, we both come from kind of big families. I've always wanted a big family. At that point, we were both 28, and Teo passed away January 13th of 2012. And so we walked out of the hospital, and I just remember driving home and walking into our house that didn't feel like home anymore. And just looking around and just thinking, what now? Like, God, what in the world? What am I supposed to do with myself now? And we took time off of everything. Jeff took more time off of work, and we just kind of were a family trying to navigate what to do next. Just how to be.
How did your daughter respond?
She was 3, and Teo was her best friend. So she kept asking if Jesus was going to bring him back, drop him off, if Jesus was, like she had questions like, is Jesus giving him ice cream? Is, like all of these things. We would go to Walmart, and she would tell like the greeter person, like our entire life story. My brother just died. He's in heaven. He's with Jesus. Someday we get to go be there too. Like, just the entire life story as I'm like pushing the cart. Like, I can't do this right now, but it was just such this childlike faith that really, our kids kept us going.
Okay, so 2012, you're moving forward, you take some time off. How long before you decide we're going to start the process of adoption?
At that point, I felt like having another child biologically was scarier. And I think so many adoptive parents go into adoption like this is the less painful way, maybe, right? Like I hear that a lot. We're going to adopt now. After we're done having biological kids, we'll just adopt. And they make it's so romanticized, which is really horrible. I mean, it's such a lie, right? To romanticize such a tragic thing in a child's life. But I think we don't think about it. We're not doing it intentionally. We didn't go into adoption with the intention of romanticizing anything. We didn't go into it as if we were rescuing. We didn't do any of that. We started actually foster care classes. We got to the last class, and of course, reunification is the main goal of foster care. You want to reunify families. You want to keep them together. We got to that point, and when Jeff and I kind of looked at each other and we're like, this is not for us right now. We had just lost Teo. our biggest thing was we didn't want Ava to go through that over and over and over and over again. So we started researching international adoption options. And to be honest with you, there weren't as many as I thought, because there were just age restrictions in place in so many different areas. And some of the travel was just too much for us. Jeff couldn't take that much time off work, or, there were just different things that kind of, I guess, guided our decision. So we ended up adopting from the Democratic Republic of Congo, thinking that the process would be quick, thinking that we would get to bring our kids home that year. We were kind of diving in. It just seemed like a really good fit for our family. And we met some people that had adopted from there, and just heard a lot of good things about these programs. We actually were matched with our daughter. In March of 2013. And we had set out just to adopt one child. Now, we had been given the advice that when you get your home study done, to make sure that you are approved for more than you think you're going to adopt. Because internationally, if they find a sibling, or if they find a sibling, or if you decide to adopt 2 children, it was much easier just to add on rather than start over. So we were approved for 2 children. We went in thinking we were going to adopt one. We were matched with Issa, our daughter. And this whole time I'm like, God is just kind of like, kind of nudging me. And I'm over here like, okay, God, if you really want us to adopt 2 children, you're going to have to tell Jeff yourself. Like, I can't be the one to do that. I just felt like there's no way, So 2 weeks after we had accepted Issa's referral, Jeff was up early. I got up to kind of, fix breakfast and all that stuff. And he pulled me aside and he's just like, Tiffany, I think God wants more of us. And I'm like, okay. He said, I think we need to call and find out if there are any other children waiting to be adopted in her foster home that she's already bonding with. So I'm over here like, oh my gosh, okay. So I call our caseworker and she said, no, everyone's matched. That kind of closed the door for me. I'm like, okay. So then that was around 9:00 in the morning. By noon, I got a call back from her and she said, Tiffany, you would not guess what just happened. And I'm like, I just, whatever. I wasn't prepared for what she was going to tell me. And she said a little boy just came into care. They placed him in her foster home. They're already working on his paperwork because he had been in care for a while, but they hadn't placed him in the foster home until then. And, I'm going to send you a picture. I think you need to pray over him. So we did, and he was our son. So we said yes to that referral, and we ended up bringing home Crusoe and Issa Issa came home in 2015 and Crusoe came home in 2016. So it was a long wait.
And how old were they when you first got matched? It's a long wait.
Yeah. When we first got matched, she was 18 months and he was 3.
Okay. And then when did they come home?
So she was 4 and he was 6.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Did you have to go back and forth?
So we went over once. We did. We went over once. We met them. It was excruciating to let go.
Mm-hmm.
And they still remember. They still remember that. They will tell us, like, we were crying. We were crying all the way home in our car. And I'm like, oh, I know. So was I. So yeah, it was really hard. It was really hard.
It's amazing what children have to endure. That they have to go through that separation and that they have to wait. They get this moment with you, this love, and then they have to go back and wait for the paperwork. Mm-hmm. And there's nothing to do to change that, but it's just so unbelievable how much these little people have to go through.
Yeah, it really is. And I mean, I wish it was simpler. Like, from our perspective, it would make sense for it to be simpler, right? And the way I tell it to them is because they've asked us, like, why did you wait so long to come get us? clearly it wasn't our choice to wait that long. And we just tell them, listen, we did the best we could with what we had. And the government has all of these things in place to protect you. Like, they really believe they're protecting you. They want to make sure that they're, without a shadow of a doubt, you didn't accidentally get separated from your parent or, any of these things. And they try the best. I do believe that they try their best to do what they think is best for the children. And it just ends up, sometimes things are just hard.
Mm-hmm.
And our kids are amazing, though. I mean, they've just grown so much. And I don't know. I tell them all the time, I'm like, I don't know how we got the best kids in the world, but we somehow have 6 of the best kids in the world. And it's incredible. We're just thankful.
I just
thankful.
want to go back to something you said before when you started the process, and you said, how will we afford this? And I want to say to our listeners, if you are just starting the process, the money will come. It always comes.
Absolutely.
And that should not be something that stops you. The money will come. And in your story and my story are very similar, because you actually had a house fire.
We did.
And that money helped you with your adoptions. And that seems very tragic, like going through that. How is that going to help you? But it did.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes. And actually, during like I said before, we have such an amazing community here, and they did fundraisers for us, and they supported us. And there were all kinds of ways I could go into that. But one thing too was, there was a point in our adoption where it was taking longer than we expected, and we didn't know how we were going to come up with that money. There were 2 points, actually. 2 big big chunks of money that we needed. And we were just like, I went to our pastor's wife and I was just telling her about it. And she said, God's going to provide, because these are your kids. And she just had such faith. And I was over here like, how is this going to work out? Running the numbers logistically, how is this going to work out? And literally that week I called to check on one of our accounts through one of our grant agencies that we had used. And the lady said, well, hang on a minute. And then she came back and she's like, I just had to double check this because I've never seen anything like it. And we had an anonymous donation of $20,000 into our account.
Oh my gosh.
And it was like literally the exact amount that we needed to keep our adoption going. The process just took so much longer than anyone expected, that our agency had to, charge more to keep our kids in foster care, to keep them fed, to keep them going to school, to keep them safe, to cover medical expenses, all of that. It just cost more. It just cost more to do that overseas. And that's what we were praying for. And God provided that week, and just, here you go. And I still have no idea who it was.
That is the best. And in our story, and people know this, but when we were adopting in Florida, a storm came through, a hailstorm in Colorado. It destroyed our entire roof. It totaled our car. This is why we're gone in Florida. And after we found that out, we all went to eat, and somebody broke in our car and stole all of our computers. And we were like, this is awful. And it ended up all working out. It's just one of those things. You go through all these trials, and they are to benefit you often. And so the money will come. I always say that. And through fundraising. Fundraising wasn't a thing when we first started adoption. We didn't even know that was possible. But now it's so common for people to have fundraisers. So I just want to hit that money thing again. God will provide.
God does provide. He does.
So you went on and had another baby, and you said that baby brought your family all together.
Yes. So we had Luca in 2018. And so, 2 years, but pretty much 2 years after the other kids came home. And a lot of times, especially in situations like with our son, he had been moved multiple times while he was in Congo. And we were a little concerned that he would feel replaced by this baby. It really was the opposite. It solidified their place in our family so much. Like, they got to be a part of us bringing this baby home. They got to see that they weren't being replaced, They got to be a part of his life and help take care of him. And it was really such a beautiful, beautiful thing.
And what's his name?
His name is Luca. Mm-hmm.
That is so sweet. Yeah. And I think it's such a blessing that you ended up having another little baby. And people say that often, that they bring home a baby and it brings everyone together. We had that happen as well. Our last baby, we didn't know if we were going to get her. We didn't even know if we should get her. And when we brought her home, it gelled our family together. It was the very piece that we needed. Yes, it is.
It's so neat.
Thank you so much for coming on the show today, Tiffany. I know your story is hard to tell, I'm sure, for you. And our listeners are so appreciative of the honesty and truth that you spoke today. And I know that there are listeners out there who needed to hear that, and something happened in their heart because you shared that. So thank you again. You have a blog. Tell everybody where they can read, because you talk about loss of a child, you talk about adoption, foster care. Where can people find that blog?
TiffanyNardoni.com, and it's Nardoni for anyone trying to spell it.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me so much.
And thank you for listening. If you have an adoption story you'd like to share, please email us at afallon@adoptionnowpodcast.com. We'd love for you to subscribe to our weekly podcast and follow us on social media. Thank you for joining us on Your Adoption Show. See you next episode.